Welcome everybody to the last panel on growing the global orange village from Singapore to the world. I just want to say on a personal note, I'm really pleased to be here, and frankly, I think I'm really in awe of what Doreen and IX has been able to achieve, and really inspired by their vision of reaching $10 billion by 2030. I think this idea of being able to raise finance for gender and climate in the global south, and the way they do monitoring at the impact level down to the final consumers is really quite something. Also maybe from the World Bank, their mission is very much in line with ours, which is around eradicating poverty, boosting shared prosperity on a livable planet. So there's a lot of synergies here. And as head of the bank office in Singapore, I'm also really pleased to see the role that Singapore has played in the success of the Orange movement to date. But Steve, I'm going to start with you. How do you think Singapore's unique position contributed to the growth and impact of the Orange movement? And what do you think are the key lessons for other regions that they can draw on from the experience here?
Yeah, where Singapore looks at impact and sustainability differently than a lot of jurisdictions is that it recognizes that you have to start with the ESG material factors across the entire business that you're looking at, whatever the financial instrument is, whatever the business is. So you have to look at the materiality as it cuts across E, S, and G. And so that's one difference that Singapore has that a lot of jurisdictions don't have. And then it requires full transparency. And so, we're in the SGX, and the Singapore Exchange requires, those listed companies to be transparent in where they are in terms of ESG. And that's very different, where we are in the United States. And it's why, it's partially why Donald Trump, won the most recent election. It's why we see a very anti-ESG blowback in the U.S. It's why businesses and investors and the U.S. government and universities are no longer promoting DEI. In fact, they're saying we're not going to take into account gender, and that is going to have huge setbacks for what's done. And the reason you haven't had, in part, that anti-ESG effort here, that anti-ESG blowback, is because the Singapore government recognizes that you have to look at all material factors. You have to look at the E, you have to look at the S, you have to take it all into account, you have to be transparent in where you are, and you have to measure it. And that fits in exactly with what what the Orange movement is about. Now, we may have to start ditching some language that is unhelpful, because we have to recognize where ESG is now globally. But what we're all trying to accomplish hasn't changed, and it's still achievable if we stick to really the framework that Singapore has set forth, that IIX has been doing ever since it was created.
Thanks, Steve. So notwithstanding the U.S., we have seen the Orange movement gain some traction from Indonesia to Australia to Bangladesh, Sweden, Japan. Katja, what do you think has made the model so attractive and adaptable across such diverse regions?
Thank you. I just want to start reacting a little bit to what you have said, and then I was starting, so I'm from UN Women, and movement building is something how we have been born as UN Women. For the ones that don't know, UN Women is one of the youngest UN agencies, so really grown out of a feminist movement into a UN agency, and I think this is really an important thing that we need, especially when I hear you talking. I think movement is needed, and what we have been seeing ahead of the Orange movement, I think what had to happen to actually be able to be here over the past 20 years has been a lot of movements towards gender equality, getting to the SDGs, so there's been a lot of that movement, what we have seen. But most recently, and I think just sharing UN Women's experience a little bit, we have been diversifying also into who to engage in the conversations. Very strong in the beginning, CSOs, civil society, NGOs, but most recently, for the past 10 years actually, we have started to engage very strongly also with the private sector. to really see on how can we work together to change gender equality, how to make business work for women, how to make the economy work. And I think that really opened sort of the conversation into how to get different stakeholders on the agenda. So UNWomen has a framework which is called Women's Empowerment Principles, where we've really mobilized a lot of private sector companies. And when we've started to kind of evaluate a little bit more from where do they come, we have seen that the financial sector actually has been not very representative in the beginning of that movement. So I think it was really essential what the Orange movement has been building even before it became an Orange movement. I think really opening the financial ecosystem to make capital work for women as well. So I think now we are at a moment where actually everything comes together. I don't think we are at the pivotal moment yet. I think we still have to work together to get to that tipping point. But I think what I found very interesting and compelling, especially when we talk with the stakeholders that we have, is that I think the Orange movement is not only a movement and an advocacy platform, but it really has very tangible, different ways of engagement and tools and really drive action. So I think that's where really people can relate to and really want to take it forward. But yet I have to say we really need to move the movement even further to get to a really big impact that we all want to see.
Thanks, Katja. Although we failed in this last election in the US to see a woman president, we have seen the rise of women leaders in places like Mexico and Finland and New Zealand, Tanzania, where they're also at the helm of driving climate action. Steve, I'm going to turn back to you again. How do you see the Orange movement fitting into this larger, hopefully global momentum?
And I think that's part of what will be critical in driving the movement forward, is ensuring that we tie gender not to just a quota number, but to say, this is what is going to make a difference. When we have a more diverse group, we can make better decisions when it comes to whoever, if you're a business, we can make better decisions when it comes to our customers. If our board is more representative, if our board is representative of who we're selling to, then we're going to make better decisions about who we're selling to. If we have a broad-based employees in terms of diversity, be it gender or otherwise, you want to have a broad board because they're going to make better decisions about their employees. And so making that, tying diversity into concrete, if you're a business, financial returns, if you're a government providing better services, that's what's going to make the difference. And that's where, I would take a lesson from, the recent U.S. And what we saw is when, President Biden said, I must take a woman, I must do this. That got pushback. But if you were to say, I want to have the most diverse cabinet I could possibly have because that's going to be most representative of the country and that's going to help me govern best, he would have not had that blowback. So I think that's what we need to show, be it government or be it business, be it finance. How do you tie it to outcomes? Why is it important? And just, of course, you need to have a diverse board to be able to do that. And I think shifting the language a bit is going to help us achieve those goals and hopefully get the United States to where other governments are.
Thanks, Steve. Simon, welcome to Singapore. You're hailing from Australia. Today we've discussed the challenges faced by underserved communities and emerging markets in driving sustainable change. Given your work at Leeaf, the Family Foundation, how do you see the relevance of Orange in markets like Australia and beyond?
Thanks. Really excited to be here. I think, firstly, I'll apologise to the audience and the people at home that you're not listening to my wife. My wife is the chair of our Family Investment Committee, my wife is the chair of our foundation, and my wife is the chair of our charity. I guess that has allowed me to first-hand experience the benefits of having a woman in a position of leadership, and more importantly, a woman in authority or a decision maker on deploying capital. And that is what I think is really important to understand. And so I think the challenges that, both women and underserved communities face in accessing capital. That's not only limited to the emerging markets. This is a global problem. And I think, for us as investors, looking to get back into the market after a sale of a strategic asset within the family, and especially I think our family office is heavily focused on the environment, on green, and we operate in plastic reduction, nature repair, conservation, endangered animals, but I think what has become, really apparent to us is the importance of Orange and the importance of this movement. And I think what we've seen so far from Orange and IIX has been nothing less than, extremely impressive in what they're trying to create and what they're trying to do. I think back to what was a extremely chance meeting for Lisa and I, walking into a meeting in Sydney where we weren't quite sure what we were walking into, but there was the Orange team, and I think we were extremely fortunate that we walked into the initial discussions of the planning for a potential Orange guarantee that would fit into the Australian financial markets. And I think for Lisa and I, once we looked at the potential to deploy capital here to significantly increase the amount of women that are brought into this solution side of the problems that we face. So for us, it was a kind of a bit of a no-brainer. But for us, we viewed this as an amazing opportunity to get involved and get engaged. I think there is an urgent need for women to be brought in on all sides of this, both solutions and at capital deployment. Thanks.
Thanks, Simon. And it's great to see how Orange is being incorporated into your green foundation. Ayako, let me turn to you. UNDP has extensive experience in scaling sustainable initiatives, globally. What key insights can you share regarding the challenges and opportunities in scaling initiatives like the Orange Movement?
Thank you, Julia. Just to introduce where UNDP stands in this Orange Movement is that we are very active in mainstreaming, especially like gender-responsive climate investment. Then we engage different partners and different stakeholders. If we kind of classify two different groups, one is engagement with government. We support a lot of government, more than 120 governments globally, so that the government can integrate SDGs together with dual tagging, gender to be considered within climate finance around the world. And also, that we have celebrated a partnership with AIX, that, we started collaboration in Bangladesh to launch this orange bond. Likewise, not only orange, but also different color, blue, green, and, different, maybe more like a nature, tiger-related theme. We are supporting both government as well as private sector in issuing such interesting instruments, not only this, bond. Together with these instruments, we also actively talking and then advising private sectors so that they can integrate frameworks so that they can start running and then, starting to be a solution in terms of businesses, of course, capital, talents, and everything. In coming back to challenges and then opportunities, I would probably highlight a few points so that maybe, Singapore, how Singapore can work to scale up and then, support the entities across Asia Pacific. I think in the first few things, not really about Asia Pacific, but as some of panelists mentioned, it's global, universal issues. One is systemic barrier for women in doing, businesses, and also, access to resources, business solution, technology, as well as, capital. Like in India, we know that 14% of entrepreneurs are women, but just 5% can get appropriate size of capital. Maybe Singapore, being a financial hub, it could probably utilize more like ventures in Singapore to be active in the space. Then the second point is low engagement and then participation of private sectors in this space. There are quite a few interests, and then I spoke with the fellow participant here, but also daily conversation. A lot of interests are shared with us, but actual transactional participation is quite limited. I think a lot of issues have been discussed over today, but because it's mostly voluntary, and then there's a huge shortage of incentives. So I think the industry as well as governments need to devise substantial incentives. And Singapore have got huge financial investment ecosystem. So I think it's expected those can be active and scale up. Then another point of challenges is fragmentation of a financial system in the region. For instance, like economic development phase, like Singapore is leading, but also huge sort of entities who are still in the early stage, are getting out from poverty and then economic development. So there is no one-size-fits-all solution. For instance, some kind of regional divide is we understand the women in Cambodia and in Laos, for instance, have less sort of chance to get access to finance to start, their renewable and then, gender responsive approaches. I think it's, shortage of coordinated policy intervention. I think we may have some follow-up questions on that. Yeah, so that's one point. And then another point is short of, a standardized framework to encourage this women responsive financing framework. IIX have been, doing a tremendous effort, and then gender seal, and then, orange bond principle. But I think it has to be applied in a larger scale. And also maybe, Singapore MAS could work to push some gender assurance through a green bond framework. Opportunities, let's look at opportunities. I think, flip side, and then the level of economic, business, and financial footprints of Singapore across Asia Pacific. I think Singapore can further develop their journey of a green finance hub. I think there are interesting ecosystem. Maybe take example of a Climate Impact X. It could probably incorporate some gender criteria or lens so that we can enhance the emerging carbon trade market, but also it has support system in inclusion of the benefits to the women, as I think a couple of previous panel discussed. I think those efforts in green finance hub and also infrastructure is something I think Singapore finance and also business corporates have an advantage. I think a lot of climate investment is happening, and then there should be some efforts in mainstreaming women lens into this climate infrastructure. And then I think one of the interesting development is energy transition. Last month there was a new report encouraging actually to ADB, but to again the benefit and then participation of women in this important energy transition, taking example of a Chebon plant project. So maybe I pause here and yeah.
Thanks very much. So I encourage everybody to keep sending questions in. I have a couple questions like for all the panel that maybe we'll do. One is just kind of following up on the barriers to really rolling out Orange Movement and to have it be impactful across different countries. Katja, maybe I'll let you start off with that one.
Thank you. I'm going to not only talk about barriers, but to translate barriers into opportunities. Obviously, I think that's why we are all here. I think we have heard a lot about the need for awareness and capacity building in the morning, and I think this is one thing that we have seen as well. We've recently done some research with the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, for example, to really document actually good practices on where is the return on investment case, what went well, what didn't go so well. So I think really sharing and documenting and making visible what works and what doesn't work, I think really helps in creating that movement. And I just want to also say, I know we speak all about the Orange Movement, and obviously we want this all to travel, but I think we should recognize that the bigger sort of thinking around new investment tools into gender equality, I think there's more out there, and I think we need to bring these movements together into one stream and really complement each other or reinforce each other. So I think that's something what we see as well. How can we build scale for such important movements? And I think especially if we look at the intersection, I don't know who it was, how minimal actually the size for the moment is. So if we don't join forces, I think then the movements won't become bigger and travel over the different oceans. So I think just that scale element, one thing which really came to my mind, and when we started talking with Natasha and the team here from IAX, we really said who are kind of the aggregators or who are actually the stakeholders that have a big impact. And I know we come to this a little bit later, but since we are at the Singaporean Stock Exchange and since we have been doing this research with the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, we have been looking into what role good stock exchanges actually play, and looking at the size of, I think it's like 90 trillion, I think is the number that I've read on capital that's out there on stock exchanges in the world. So how can we bring the group of listed companies together, work with stock exchanges in a more structured and systemic way? And most recently, we started working with Australia with DFAT. No wonder that DFAT is here, works a lot on programs with UN Women as well, particularly on a program which is called the Gender Action Lab, which is all around experimentation, how to leverage innovation capabilities of the private sector. But we've said, and we've kind of made it really an indicator on measure of success on how can we work with stock exchanges that have so many listed companies on really help to advance gender equality in these companies. Because if it's advancing in the listed companies in the first place, then these companies become also more aware. They could become issuers of bonds. And so we really want to kind of step into this. And the previous panel alluded on data, and recently we've looked at all the stock exchanges in the region here, together with the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, and really looked at the listed companies and the women's representations on boards, only on the listed companies in our region here in Asia and the Pacific. And in Singapore, as 18% of the listed companies have minimum 30% of women on board, which is in the top 5, just to say. So these are the best companies in the region, or the best stock exchanges. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done. And interestingly then, when you talk to the companies or research some of these companies, which we have done as well, where do they make progress in the first place? Is on their workplaces. The first investment comes in investing in women in leadership, safe workplaces, and rightly so. But the deeper you get into the marketplace, and recently we've done a trends report on that, you see that the actions become less. And when I speak marketplace, what do I mean is kind of how to procure companies their services. Is there a gender lens to that? How much do they procure from women-owned businesses, for example? But then if you look into in the financial sector, you are a bank, just an example. How's your gender equality in your company? Okay, some of them start really to put measures in place. Are you having financial products that are targeted to women? Less so. So I think there's really a lot of work that we can do the deeper we come into the marketplace. And I think that's where the opportunity is to really connect different stakeholders together. And maybe just bringing that back to the Orange Movement, and then I'll leave it here. I think one of the things what we have also heard, if investments are done, and I think it's great to see how the transparency framework actually evolved on the Orange Bond principles as well. But I think it's hugely important that we keep this as our currency of trust. Because if we fail there, and if we cannot kind of demonstrate that the proceeds are invested into advancing gender equality, and I think sometimes we still have this, and I know it's not the case, but I think sometimes in our minds is giving just the money into the hand of the woman, invest in one woman entrepreneur, then the tick in the box is there. But to really make gender responsive investments, there is much more needed than just giving the money into the hand of a woman entrepreneur, for example. So that's where I think technical assistance becomes also very important, especially in the beginning, to build that trust and build that confidence of more people wanting to invest in orange bonds.
Thanks, Katja, for that. Steve, you've been with IX throughout its journey, and I get the sense that the Orange movement needs to grow, and you talked about communication as being an important part of that. I'm kind of curious to hear your views, I mean, to touch on these barriers and opportunities, but also how you think to grow it in the next phase, to kind of really get that bump up.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think, you know, Doreen and Rob have been doing this all along, and you know, what I've been seeing in terms of where the next action is needed on climate, in particular, is in two areas. When it comes to climate resilience, there's been a lot of money has gone, I think most of the money has gone to mitigation. Electric vehicles, you know, solar, renewables, and not nearly enough money has gone to adaptation. And the trend that I'm starting to see in my perch at the Global Private Capital Association, which, you know, the IFC is our founder, which MAS supports, is that this is what businesses are going to have to start doing more. Adaptation is going to hit them hard because it's only getting hotter, it's only getting drier or wetter, or we're getting an increased intensity of storms. And so where is the funding going to come to enable those businesses to adapt? And who is that going to impact? I mean, you know, it's going to impact all of us, which means, of course, is going to have a disproportionate impact on women in countries in the global south. And so that's one direction where the Orange Movement and bonds as opposed to, you know, debt as opposed to equity is going to provide some of that solutions. So I think climate adaptation as opposed to mitigation is going to be a focus going forward. And I think the other focus that we're starting to see more of is it's not the energy transition. We have to have a just energy transition. And too often we've only focused, the investor community in particular, we focused on the E and not the S. And there is almost always a disproportionate hit on the S when you only focus on the E. So when you're putting all of your money into climate mitigation, well, what's going to happen to the coal mines? What's going to happen to the people who are, you know, the small sharehold farmers when you're not going to have palm anymore because you have rules against that in Europe. What's going to happen to the people who have to rely on that electricity that isn't there anymore? So we have to have a just transition, and again, it's not going to be equity that's going to solve those problems. It's going to be debt, and it's going to have a disproportionate impact in the Global South, which is where the Orange Movement addresses. So I think those two things is what has been part of IIX's DNA, is how do we get out in front of these things? How do we recognize where that holistically looking at ESG needs to get addressed? And I think it's perfectly positioned to do that now.
Thanks, Steve. Simon, I was seeing you nod a little bit throughout that, and I'm going to take a subset of this question, but I mean, thinking about from Family Foundation and how you were really focused on green, and now you're focusing on orange and the gender thing, do you want to comment a little bit about how you as a foundation are sort of taking that on board, and how you think that can work with other family foundations, of which there are hundreds, if not thousands, in Singapore, I believe. I can't remember the numbers, like trillions of dollars of foundation money out of Singapore.
Yeah, I think, look, when, like I said, for a family office that's been so focused on the environment, I think that chance meeting when we walked in, and I think opened all of our eyes around, you know, we were tackling this, although we thought on multi-layer, where we were in plastics, we were in nature repair, we were in conservation. We thought, cool, we've got this covered. We're covering this in a multi-layer problem. I think what, you know, has become apparent to us is that there are so many more layers to this, and this is not a government problem. This is not a foundation problem. This is not a high net worth problem. This is not a community problem. This is an everyone problem. And how do we mobilise everyone to play a part in this and be involved in impact? And I think, you know, we enjoy a lot of cooperation with family offices and with foundations on working towards how can we, you know, get the masses or get everyone involved in this, because if we don't, we're not going to get out of this. So I think it's, you know, it's really important.
Thanks, Simon. So I'm going to turn to this question from the audience, and sorry, my eyes are not fantastic. So it's many of the panelists share, can the panelists share with us ways that they can integrate Orange in each of their existing work streams, be it UN agencies, World Bank foundations, or others? So I think you handled yours, but Ayako, do you want to take a step?
Sure, happy to. As you know, Julia, initially you mentioned, you know, we also, as one of UN agency, what IIX, you know, is committed to, like gender, you know, should be one of the essential values in whatever entity does. So any programs we run, any place, of course, you know, equity in terms of gender or, you know, physical mobility or location, that's a key part. That's where we start programming. That's A. But also such, you know, thematic gender inclusivity, and then how that should be institutionalized. Of course, that's another part of more technical sort of intervention. As I highlighted initially, the national budgeting planning intervention, it's called integrating national financing framework, is what we are, you know, running more than 120 countries, and Asia Pacific, I think, wise, we are working more than 30 countries. So that's how we work with government, so that the private sector can be involved, any civil society, and then it, of course, you know, reach to the beneficiaries on the ground. And some of, you know, interesting intervention we did in Indonesia is we work with a couple of line ministries in Indonesia, you know, Women Empowerment Ministry, but also, you know, Financial Planning Authority, and then we developed a guidance how, you know, national budget should, you know, highlight participation of women in climate activities. So it's quite a universal approach that we do everywhere in the region and then globally.
Thanks. Does anybody else want to add to that?
I can come in. Another UN agency, maybe not as interesting, but I mean, gender is for us obviously our bread and butter. But maybe highlighting a little bit sort of the connection between different of these organizations, what different roles they could have. I think we talked quite a little bit in terms of accountability and transparency. So one of the ways how UN Women, for example, works and embraces, I think, the Orange Principles in a wider interpretation is we want to advocate that companies have certain criteria that they need to report on, be it women in leadership, be it pay equity, et cetera, et cetera. And I think these are not all represented for the moment in ESG and in most of the countries across our region here, particularly in ASEAN, we have recently done a study on this, is actually very limited. So I think a way to kind of drive normative and systemic change is really to work at different levels, as Ayako has explained as well, with regulators on one side. So how can we influence, how can we align on maybe 2-3 indicators to start with, where we really push and advocate and create transparency that companies report on these. And then how can we actually support companies on these journeys, right? And that's where the capital could come in. So if we then provide capital for smaller suppliers, for example, that might not have the means to do that, how can we kind of support this with different type of financial instruments? So I think it's important to not kind of forget this normative change, and that's, I think, how UN agencies would kind of use our role and our influence with regulators, for example. So that's the first one. I know the time is ticking, so while I have the mic, I'll just keep going and just want to kind of everyone that's streaming in the other panels a little bit, what do you want to see in the future and how to work together in 4 years Orange Forum. And Natasha is laughing already, you know exactly what's going to come. I think we need to keep innovating. And I'm not going to ask you because you innovate like on a minute basis, I think. But I think we have been looking at gender and climate. There's a second question here, so to make it relevant that I'm speaking. The Singapore government has been very intentional about having full workforce participation. What can other countries learn from that? So I want to take this point on full economic participation of women, which was one of the 3, I think, principles or missions in the beginning we have heard. This will not be possible if we continue to invest in entrepreneurship and all things that we have been seeing, if we don't address the care burden that women are taking as employees, as entrepreneurs, every time that we speak, why don't women want to grow? Someone has said this morning, they don't want to grow their business anymore because they have the family responsibilities on the side. As long as we don't find a way to really address that unequal share of care responsibilities, and my dream, Doreen, I'm looking to you, I'm sure you can make this happen. Why can we not create a bond which could be a public and private one? Because we will need public finance, because care cannot be only private finance, but that really address that issue. And we have seen so many solution providers out there that need finance and subsidized finance. So this is something where UN Women would be really happy to embrace the Orange Bond principles into advancing a crucial issue for women's economic empowerment. So sorry that I kept a bit more time.
No, that was great, Katja. I mean, just in the remaining minutes, maybe I'm just going to turn to everybody to kind of give some final thoughts. But with this idea about how to keep the Orange movement going, I think, including the World Bank, do things that I think very much align with the Orange movement, but we don't call it that. But I think there is a little bit of a galvanizing cry and a rallying cry around labeling it and the fact that it's being measured. The social aspect of the ESG is very nascent, but I think is becoming increasingly important. So in thinking about how we're taking this beyond Singapore, beyond where IX has already been, like how are we continuing to push this, maybe with some parting thoughts. I'm just going to go down the panel. So Steve.
I thought it would only be fair if you went reverse order, right? That would have been much more fair. Now, I think one of the lessons is that, look, government is not going to solve the problems that our planet is facing, and you know, agencies are not going to solve the problems our planet is facing, because we wouldn't have these problems if they could do that on their own. So we need to have private capital. We need to have private finance as part of these solutions. Some of it is some of it is, where you can invest and get a market rate of return and do impact. But there's other times you're going to need subsidized finance. You're going to need the governments and the development finance institutions and the like to work with private capital to do that. And so a lot of these orange bonds are a good model to follow. And we just are going to have to figure out, okay, what is it that government can't do? Where is it that private capital can provide solutions and get a market rate of return? And then what's in that middle ground? And I think that's a real opportunity going forward that IIX has recognized. Was it 2009, I think, whenever IIX was founded, and has been moving that journey forward.
Thanks, Katja.
I'm going to keep on the stock exchange alliances. So I think we have to learn a lot also from other regions what has happened there. So I think for us it will be really kind of seeking and supporting, and IIX and UN Women for the moment explore on how we could do this potentially moving forward to bring actually the learnings from different stock exchanges across the world together on how they have advanced gender bonds and other financial instruments, and then really kind of blend this with the orange movement, so to really create a collective movement moving forward.
I think, look, as investors, I think wading through the sea of normal financial products to find opportunities like this is really important. And when you find them, leaning in and providing support and trying to ensure that they succeed. And if we do that enough, enough of these things will become mainstream, and it won't be impact investing, it will just be investing.
I would input, I was just thinking about the book called Invisible Woman. I think maybe some of you might have read it. The conclusion of that book is, the data about women body or thinking are not really institutionalized. So I think what we can do is do solid analysis, and then those conclusions, like a woman as a solution, to be institutionalized. And then a lot of training to the leadership of wherever, corporates, schools, any groups. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. So big hand to the panel. Thank you so much.